All right, welcome everybody from wherever you are in the world. Today we're going to be speaking about automating your Power BI admin tasks with PowerShell. So sticking true to form, I thought I would do it inside PowerShell, or at least the VS Code editor, which is where I'm doing my PowerShell in. All right, so my name is Michael Johnson. As you said, I'm from South Africa. And just what we're going to speak about today is how we can sort of automate many of those tasks. So it's time for me to go fetch my son. Don't worry, I've made alternative plans. Okay, so essentially, we're going to automate a lot of these tasks, or some of these tasks that we usually do manually in sort of Power BI. Power BI doesn't really have a lot of automation tools for it. Okay, but Power BI, the Power BI APIs and PowerShell sort of really sort of solve that for us. So we're going to start with sort of looking at what is the APIs, and PowerShell uses a REST API. And what that really means is that API is essentially means that it's an application programmable interface. So it's great for computers to speak to each other. It's well structured. The message interchange is well known, right? And then we use REST, and REST sort of makes a lot of this easy. If you came from like sort of some of the old sort of systems, with a lot of session and sort of state management. So REST is stateless, right? So that's really nice, means that every call happens in itself. So it's a bit like a stored procedure, right? We usually use HTTP to manage this. And then just an important thing to remember, REST is not it's an architectural constraint, not a protocol. So each one is different, which can be a little bit frustrating. But Microsoft have generally been fairly consistent with all of their APIs. Okay, but the big bit is OAuth, right? So it's like, how do we manage that authentication layer? So you can see that really what we need to do is we need to communicate with AD first, then bring back a token, and then send that token off to the appropriate service, which for us would be Power BI, and then bring that back. That gets a little bit complicated if you're not a developer, right? So what they've done is they've really wrapped all of these difficult things inside PowerShell to make it really easy. All right, so what is PowerShell? PowerShell is essentially just it's a cross-platform task automation solution with a whole bunch of functions. But instead, let's just begin by actually showing you some of these functions, right? We want you to die. Okay, so PowerShell is an object-based thing, so it actually uses .NET under the core. So we can use a lot of functions that we're used to. We're going to start with something like getDate, right? So if you're from SQL, that's the same as date. Using. How long has it been since I did SQL? Date now, right? GetDate. All right. So here you can see we can query the date. But this is an object, so we can actually query properties of that object. Okay, I'm not going to spend a ton of time in PowerShell, but you can see that we actually return, let you know, today is a Friday, right? We also get things like variables, so we can save values into these variables. And then we can do things like writing out the screen. So I'm going to quickly sort of write, I can write, Michael enjoys speaking at 30 minutes, well. Okay, we can also do things like arrays. So I've added William and Ben as hosts. And then we can do things like sort of looping through those sort of hosts, and then finally do things like writing to file. Right? So these are some of the things that PowerShell can do, but it's not too important. Okay, so how do we get going with it? Everything in PowerShell actually uses commandlets, okay, and commandlets really are encapsulated versions of those functions. Now, not everything that's available in the REST APIs is available in PowerShell, but that's fine. There's actually a workaround for that. So obviously what we're going to do is we would run the install module command. I've already done that. It takes about 2 minutes to install. I'm not going to do that now. You obviously don't have to install all the commandlets. If you were only interested in the subset, no, you could do that. Then you can do typical other sort of commands that you would do, like you would do sort of updates. You could confirm that you've actually installed. And then we can also do things like, let's go and list all the available commands. So if you wanted to see what was happening, you could go and get that. But all of this is also available via the Microsoft Health documentation. So that we can find right over there. So you can see the list of all of the functions that are available via the PowerShell functions. And if you wanted to get a little bit of help, you can use the get help function, right? So that's an inbuilt measure. It's actually not well documented. You're best going off to the website. First thing we need to do is authenticate. And Power BI uses sort of your user, this is your Azure AD sort of process. So if I wanted to log in, she might still be logged in, so it's actually going to bring up a prompt, and it's going to ask me to authenticate myself. So this is the OAuth portion. So we don't have to do this, right? All these messages, and it's just happened for us, so we don't have to know how we sort of write those handlers. So we can now actually start doing that. You could also write your own handlers, but we won't sort of do that now, right? Okay. Finally, you can sort of go and have a look at the token. So the token is that thing that allows you to access Power BI. Don't worry, the string is a lot longer. And this is almost like a username password that you can hand to the service every time. Let's have a look at some of the basic commands that we have available to us. I need to really start. Okay. So first thing is basically all the functions that you do. So I want to know what are all the workspaces that I have within my Power BI tenant, right? And there's a function called get Power BI workspaces, and that's going to list all the workspaces, and it's going to scroll it out to the screen in a sort of JSON object. I mean, in a PowerShell object. Not very usable. If you wanted to see it on the screen, we could sort of clean it up. So, and this is more PowerShell, so we could pipe one result from one PowerShell command into the next one. So we can say, well, go and get me all my PowerShell functions. Then I'm only interested in two of the properties, which is the name and the ID. And then I'd like you to display that on the screen, right? So that's going to go again. And can you see the delay there, right? So it actually takes a while to go and get this workspace. So what we really want to do is start saving these results into variables, right? So that's going to call the function once, and it's going to load that into this object, and then we don't have to go to the service multiple times, right? Because you can actually be rate limited. Many of these services are actually rate limited. Then we can sort of interrogate this, so we can go and say, go and list me the 7th workspace, which just for us, it just happened to be called demo. All right. Then we can sort of take it one step further. When you run this get Power BI workspaces, it's going to go and get you all the workspaces that you as a user have access to. However, there's often, as an administrator, there's workspaces that you don't have access to, but you still administer them in some scope. So I can actually go and set the scope, and I can say, bring in the entire organization. So go and get me all the lists. So when I run this, I would actually have more results coming back. Okay, so that's kind of fun. And then we can sort of start combining these things. So what I've got simply here is I'm going to go, I've got this workspaces, which is a list of all of my workspaces. And then I've got a for loop, a for each loop. And it's going to go, so for each workspace, iterate through this. And what it's going to do is it's going to go and get me, go and get me all the reports in each workspace. So very simply, this is going to iterate through all of my workspaces and get me all of the reports. And then you'll see like a whole bunch of these are actually empty, and that's like an old hangover to the V1 workspaces, which were automatically created for you, so they didn't even have reports going with them. All right, so that's like a fun kind of a way. Now, I mentioned earlier that not everything actually has a sort of endpoint, right? So we actually got we have the ability to have make calls directly to the API without necessarily handling all the stuff. So PowerShell still handles everything for us, but we can do all of those things that don't have an endpoint, right? And there's two things that we need to be able to do this, okay? So the function itself is going to be called Invoke Power BI REST method. Okay, and we need to give it a URL, and we need to give it a body. And really that comes from here. If we look at the REST method, so if I come and look at groups, you'll see that every method has a URL. That's the endpoint. You can see that this one actually expects a parameter within it. And then some also require a JSON body, right? So that's what that's going to do for us. So we're simply going to create that endpoint. And what this one does is it adds a user to a workspace. And then this is the body. So this is just a JSON object where I'm going to say, the email address is Neville's email address, and I would like to make him an administrator. So if I run all of these methods, see it basically, and it's going to go and add Neville to that workspace. Show you. You'll just have to trust me. We will get there in a second. Okay, so we can combine those two concepts. Okay, and this is bringing a little bit more PowerShell. So we can say, for instance, imagine I needed to go and add a user or a group to every workspace within my organization. Now, some organizations are fine. They have 10 workspaces. Some organizations have thousands, right? You don't want to be the guy who's doing that manually, right? So a little simple script like this will help us out. What I've done here is I've said, go and get me all of the workspaces that have the name data minutes in it. And then you're going to loop over it. And William's going to sort of bust my chops in a sec. So that was the alarm. Okay, so we're going to go and add that user. So this is going to essentially loop over that. And we're going to add all those users one at a time. All right. So that's a really simple little sort of control flow of some of the things that you might want to do. One of the problems we often have is that we actually need to be able to so debugging isn't always very useful. So one of the examples is we've got the activity events, and one of the restrictions on the activity event is that it actually limits us to the last 30 days, and we can only query one data set at a time. But if I run this, which actually violates that rule, you're going to see it's going to come back with this. This is not a useful error, right? So what can we do? Well, there's a handy little function called Power BI error, and you can ask for the last X amount. So I've just asked for the last one, so I know the last error I did was exactly what I want, and that's going to give me the dump, which is exactly what I'm used to getting. And here's a more useful error: adjust your date time and start time so that they're within the same UTC date, right? So exactly what I was looking for. All right, so that is my sort of movement tour of using this Power BI, PowerShell as sort of commandlets to manage or to help you manage your PowerShell infrastructure. All right, thank you, William.